Happy Sunday.
Recording in progress.
Let's see if I did all the appropriate things. And, well, let's start seated. Do you guys look like you're in a sitting mood? So, nice comfy seat, nice vertical spine, opportunity to play with that head positioning. Settling in, breathing, and feeling into your body this morning, your breath this morning, letting the eyes closed if that is beneficial for you. Finding the appropriate hand position, up or down. And then really think about slowing down the rate of respiration. We'll give ourselves about 45 more seconds here. And when your right eyes can open if they're closed, let's take the right hand and just kind of extend it out in front of us. And then with the left hand, just grab the back of that hand. And we're just going to move the wrist through flexion and extension. So just down into its full flexion space and up into its full extension space. And then we'll switch. Right hand comes behind the left, and we do this same. We're trying to take the musculature requirement out of the forearm. Forearm musculature can fatigue pretty quickly, and we're trying to use the opposite arm to make the movement happen. And then when you feel balanced, let's release that. We'll get a little bit of movement out of the way. So we'll transition to hands and knees tabletop. We'll be pretty brief here, but just finding that neutral spine. Take your left foot, extend it straight back and behind you, flex into the quad, flex into the calf, and push through the heel. Trying to get that mid and high calf musculature to activate. And then let's release the left leg back underneath the hip. So we're mirrored. And when you feel right, the right leg's going to extend back, and we're going to get that same quad flex, calf flex. So we're really strong in the leg here. And then it's just about shifting the weight back into that leg and allowing the burden of the shape to transfer to the calf. We get that elongation from that transfer. When you feel balanced, right foot or right knee comes back underneath the hips. Curl the toes and just roll back into a down dog. So kind of a weird setup, right? We have that calf space, we have some wrist space. The rest of the body can be pretty sticky. See what you can do to use that calf space in particular. Even if you're bending the knees, get back into that heel weight. And then let's walk to the front of the mat. Again, we're going to be brief. So just getting a little movement out of the way, inhale to half lift. Find that neutrality. Beautiful. Exhale all the way back into your fold and settle so that the head can drop. Grab opposite elbows, rock a little side to side. Let the lateral movement awaken some lumbar musculature. Maybe even we start to feel those lateral edges of the hips, the hip flexors start to speak to us a little bit. But really thinking about how that low back musculature can respond to some movement here. And then eventually, head comes back to neutral, hands drop, awareness drifts to the sacrum. We'll roll ourselves up so that we feel the flexion all the way through this unfolding of the spine to mountain pose. Let the hands drift to heart center. Let the quads engage, the glutes engage. Feel that strength on the top of this shape. Sweep the arms up and overhead. Exhale through forward fold. Settle into any additional space that you've crafted. Let's plant the hands and we'll walk back into plank. And then we're coming straight down to our bellies. And from the belly, we're going to slide the elbows underneath the shoulder for Sphinx. So palms down. And then position your head low enough to the mat that you don't feel compression in the lumbar. So no sensation of squish here. And then high enough that we maybe even feel some extension across the anterior musculature. So we get some of that core extension. So low enough that the lumbar is not compressing, high enough that we get that anterior lengthening. And this is going to be pretty brief as well. "20 seconds here. And when you're right, let's drop down to crocodile pose. So hands stack, forehead rest. Kind of give yourself the opportunity to note whether you feel more of that anterior relaxation or posterior relaxation. So is it lumbar or core musculature that is speaking the loudest after that hold? And we'll give ourselves just 30 seconds for that mid body to relax and come back into a neutral state. And then when you're right, let's slide our hands underneath our shoulders, play those fingers out nice and wide. We'll press up to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, we're going to extend our legs out in front of us so we end up in a little staff pose. Bending the left knee, and then taking that left ankle across, taking the left ankle across the right quad. And we're just going to manipulate the ankle here. So taking the foot and just doing some big circles. Think about the toe mound as kind of your point of reference where we want to use that to make the circle as big as possible. Very similar setup. The anterior tibialis fatigues pretty quickly. It's just musculature that doesn't do this very frequently. It gets used a lot, but it doesn't make circles with the foot a lot. So we're trying to use the hands and the arms to take off this musculature fatigue. And then we'll reverse the direction. And if you don't feel like you're getting the big enough circle, you can use the opposite hand, the right hand on that calcaneus bone, to help kind of move it in the opposite direction of the toe mound. So heel and toe mound are getting manipulated in opposite directions. And then eventually we're going to extend that left leg, and take ourselves into a forward fold. Briefly checking in with the capacity to fold at this point of our practice this morning. And then walking back up to vertical. Taking the right ankle across the left thigh. And we'll give ourselves that toe mound circle once again. Just big circles. Trying to use the ankle in all of its ranges of motion without forcing it to be weight bearing. And then eventually we're going to reverse the direction. Really looking to create as much range as is possible. And eventually there'll come a point when you feel like we've had enough. Let's extend both legs down the mat and just follow that forward into another fold. We settle and breathe into this. We'll give ourselves another 20 seconds here in this second seated fold. And when you're right, walking the spine back up towards vertical. And let's have a blanket towel handy. You may or may not need that, but just keep that handy just in case. And we're going to head straight onto our backs. And we'll get this opportunity to settle already, right? We've moved pretty quickly for a recharge class. We fit a lot into this first quarter of class. And we'll really start to slow things down now. So as you ease yourself into the mat, just note how the posterior musculature along the torso feels, how the hips feel, how the sacrum feels, how anchored you feel. And then eventually We are going to inhale our knees into a bent position if they're not already there. So the feet are flat on the mat and the kneecaps point towards the ceiling. And then we'll take our left ankle across our right thigh so that we have this figure 4-esque shape. Arms can be anywhere that feels comfortable here, but we are going to be dynamic with the legs. So you may want to have a little bit of a wider base with the arms just to provide some stability. With an exhale, we're going to extend the right leg so that we end up with a figure 4 where the external rotation comes kind of passively and naturally with gravity. I don't know if we can consider the force of gravity passive or not, but let's pretend it is. And then keeping the same level of external engagement or awareness, we're going to inhale and bend that right knee and come back up. So we're mobilizing this left hip capsule in full external rotation. With the exhale, we'll extend back out. Right leg extends, left leg falls open to that figure 4. And inhale, the knee bends. And we're just going to do this a couple times with our breath. Exhale, we extend. Inhale, we bend. There's a couple of pretty interesting things that go on here. One, we get some anterior pressure into the femoral head on the right side, and that's coming from the left ankle weight, and then the mobility, obviously. We have this huge external rotation on the left side. Because we're fully externally rotated, some of the musculature requirement wraps into the glute max, excuse me. So into the biggest glute tissue. And that doesn't often happen when we're deactivated in the totality of the leg musculature. So it's a pretty unique way to access this glute max. And the next time that the leg extends, so right leg extends, let's pause there and just let the left leg settle. Femoral head, obviously, in its externally rotated position. We're getting this openness. Make sure you're staying nice and balanced across the sacrum so that we're not rolling over to the left in the hips. We're just using the external rotation capacity of that hip capsule itself, not changing the weight distribution. And we'll give ourselves 20 more seconds just to settle here. And then when you're right, the right knee is going to bend again. That left ankle is coming up towards the torso. And this time we're going to take the right hand and clasp on the bottom of the left foot. And then the left hand is going to tuck underneath. So you're on that anterior tibialis musculature on the tibia and fibia. And we are going to just encourage the left shin, so posterior tibialis musculature, towards the nose, towards the sternum, towards the belly button. So we're super accentuating the external rotation here. The load, it comes from that femoral head getting torqued into the hip capsule. And you can extend that right leg if it feels acceptable for your left hip. Note that extending the right leg shortens the slack in the system, and we end up with more pull here through lateral edge of the hamstring and into that glute max and glute med. And we'll give ourselves 20 more seconds here on this first side. And when you feel right, left foot comes down. Extend the left leg and the right leg if the right leg isn't already extended. And just feel into the asymmetry of the hips. So even with kind of a forced symmetry of the neutrality of your mat, floor, planet beneath you, see if you can feel how much more room you have on this left side than we do on the right side. We'll, of course, fix that. And then eventually, when you feel right, we're going to bend both knees, both kneecaps point back towards the ceiling. Again, you may feel that left side openness in comparison to the right side. Right ankle is going to come across the left thigh. So we create this elevated version of a figure four. And then with an exhale, we're going to extend the left leg and open up that right side for its first kind of experience of this full external rotation with the passive or with the gravitational force load. And then when you feel like you're ready, we'll add the breath. So inhale brings the left knee back into a bent space. And the exhale extends back out. And we're just moving with our breath, just doing this in a way that's fluid and smooth. Note that the two sides may be pretty different. You may have more resistance or less resistance on that external rotation capacity here on the right hip. And so there's this ranch hand, and he works for this wealthy cattle runner. Ranch hand lives in a little house on the cattle runner's property. And this wealthy cattle runner has a big giant kind of just over on the other side of the corrals. They use a paddock system, so kind of a regenerative agriculture practice where they move the cows from small sectioned off area to small sectioned off area, and it's in a reciprocating, it's in a repeating pattern, right? They continue to move them around these paddocks, just never allowing the cows to overgraze any particular area. And because they do that, it requires an awful lot of attention and work. So this ranch hand does a lot of work. Next time your left leg extends, let's allow our body to settle there in this external rotation. The ranch hand has this son, pretty young, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And of course, he idolizes his dad. So he wants to grow up and be a ranch hand. But ranch hand work is hard. It starts way before the sun gets going, and it ends way after the sun is done working for the day. When you feel right, when you feel ready, the left knee is going to bend. We're going to slip our left hand to the bottom of the right foot, and the right hand is going to come underneath that shin, and we're just going to pull the right shin a little bit closer to us. The left leg, once again, can extend, does not have to extend. Extending the leg shortens the slack in the system. It puts more tension on the hip, puts more tension on the glutes. But just make sure that's the right choice if you do that. And we'll give ourselves 20 more seconds here on side 2. And when you're right, that right leg is going to extend. Left leg will extend as well if it is not already. And now we have a really anchored hip structure. Feel into the ilium, the bone structures that make up the pelvic bowl, right? And I want you to really feel like the pointy part of the front of the ilium is pointing straight up, like railroad tracks, straight out from your hips as you settle here. If you don't feel like that's happening, give that little lateral adjustment until you really feel like you're beaming straight up. And then align the femur, align the tibia and fibia, align the calcaneus bone, the toes, so that they're all in this straight up alignment. And keep that as you pull both knees in towards the ribs. And we give ourselves a nice little compression squeeze here. When we're fully vertically aligned, or at least in this orientation, vertically aligned, it can be pretty shocking how much pressure we end up receiving at the anterior hip crease. So if you're feeling an exorbitant amount, an extra amount of what you normally feel there, just from really being dialed in on our alignment and then asking for the full compression, not atypical at all. And then we'll relax the feet down to the mat. We're going to heel toe the feet out to the width of the mat and let the knees fall in towards one another so that we have the opportunity for the hips to rest a little bit. We've been very hip heavy for the last 12 minutes or so. We'll just settle in, slow down, and breathe here. If you want to cycle back to that practice we've been using for the last couple of classes of slowing our breath and intentionally cooling our body temperature, you're welcome to. If some other breath feels more natural or more familiar, feel free to use that as well. So one morning, this ranch hand son makes a decision that he wants to really prove to his father and to the cattle rancher himself that he can be a valuable asset to this ranch. So he sets his alarm for 2 hours earlier than his father's alarm goes off. It ends up being 2:30 in the morning. And he puts it under his pillow. He's using his phone. He turns the volume down so that just he'll hear it. It goes off. He gets up. He jumps out of bed. He puts on his full ranch attire. And he goes out and he starts filling buckets of water. Buckets of water is the very first activity that you do for the cows in the morning. And you bring buckets into the paddock so that every cow is able to drink its necessary or receive its necessary hydration. And it's a lot of buckets. There are better systems, but this ranch doesn't use one. So he ends up moving 105 5-gallon buckets of water. His hands are hurting. They're not blistering yet, but that's certainly a possibility later. By the time he's done, his father's alarm has gone off. It's taken him that 2 hours. His dad comes outside, sees him finishing up with the last bucket of water, and he comes over and he's like, wow, I can't believe you've already done this. This is amazing.
I'm just gonna go grab a cup of coffee and then I'll join you. And he says, really good job. I'm really proud of you. When you're right, when you're ready, the knees are gonna come back out to mat width, so ankle width. And then let's walk the feet back into hip width, knees will follow. Let the bottoms of the feet come together and let your knees fall out. And then pay attention to what happens in the lumbar. So if you gone into that natural arch, see if you can take your hands and manually push the thighs a little bit further away as you scoot the shoulders a little bit towards the top of your mat. And see if you can bring some more space to allow space to be the thing that brings you more to neutral. So there's really two ways we can get to neutral if we go to arch, right? We can squeeze our core and we can use the musculature, or we can lengthen out and take the arch out by pulling the musculature through structural length. So in elongating the spinal column itself. See if you can use the elongation of the spinal column instead of the activation of musculature. And if you can't, or maybe it's a combination of both, maybe it's a little core squeeze and a little pressure, but we want to get that lumbar nice and neutral. And we'll give ourselves just 20 more seconds here. And when you're right, knees come back up to neutral. We are going to extend the left leg down the mat, pull that right heel as close to the right glute as possible, and then take your left hand over on the lateral edge, that outside edge of the right thigh, and help the right thigh across your body into a twist. And then we'll roll right back. Extend the right leg, bend the left, right hand comes to the lateral edge. So bring that heel as close as possible. Right hand comes to the lateral edge, and we'll use that right hand to help roll over into a twist. And we'll come back to neutral. Left leg extends, right knee bends, and we're going to go back the left hand to the lateral edge. This time, we're going to be a little bit more static here. So we come into a twist that we can feel a little bit more comfortable in. The right hand can leave the floor or mat on that right side. So you can bring the right hand over to help accommodate this twist. If it feels appropriate or accessible, you can take that right hand and anchor it and really accentuate the twist, but only if that feels appropriate for your spine. So we can soften, right hand comes maybe towards the thigh or glute. We can deepen, let's say, right hand comes towards the mat or floor, extending away on that right side. We'll give ourselves about 40 more seconds here on this first side. And when you're right, the right leg comes back across our body. Both knees are gonna bend, and we're just gonna add a little dynamic sway here. Just trying to work out any stickiness that might come from those long holds in deep twists. And then eventually we'll solve that by just extending the right leg and helping the left leg across our body so that we end up in this nice deep static twist side two. Again, the left hand now can come over and soften, or you can keep it anchored and deepening the twist. But you want to make the right choice for your back musculature. And so while his dad is off getting a coffee, this young boy starts on the next task, which he knows is supplementing the cow's paddock feed, so the natural grasses in the paddock, with hay. And there's these big, giant, oversized bales, not the round kind, but the square kind that break off in leaflets. And he takes one bale down, he cuts the twine, he grabs 2 leaves, one in each hand, he drags it over the paddock, and he tosses one in front of each cow. He goes back, he grabs 2 more leaves and gets 2 more cows. And he continues to do that process, 2 leaves at a time, ripping down bales and cutting the twine, carrying these leaves over. And they're big and they're heavy, and he only has that finger strength, right, to hold the leaflet. So his fingers start to get more and more fatigued. Last 40 seconds on this second side. When you're right, left knee comes back across. Both kneecaps point towards the ceiling. Add a little lateral sway here. And then when it feels appropriate, knees come back to neutral. Let's grab our blanket. We'll end up implementing this in an active way, folding the blanket towel into a block-like structure and sliding that block-like structure underneath our tailbone for a nice little supported bridge. The intention here is to allow for the mid-back, so, upper lumbar, lower thoracic musculature to integrate into the new space we've created. Those big lateral sways, and now we're just going to use gravity coming off of this blanket lift, supported bridge, to just really help neutralize. So relaxing as much as is possible here. So the ranch hand takes a long coffee break to start the day, appreciating the fact that his son has done all the watering. By the time he comes back, it's about an hour later, and his son has got the hay distributed to every cow. Every cow has been presented with a leaf of hay. And he comes over and he just kind of jostles his hair a little bit. And he's like, I cannot believe you've done this already. This is incredible. I'm going to go read the newspaper. I haven't had the opportunity to read the newspaper in years. So his dad goes back into their little home. And the ranch hand son kind of thinks about, what's the next step? And he recognizes the next step is to wait till the cows have finished consuming their hay and then move them to the next paddock. And so on the far side of the next paddock, there's a gate. It's like 4 feet wide. And that's not meant for the cows. It's just meant for humans to be able to access quickly and easily. And so he opens that up and he gets into the next paddock and he prepares everything, makes sure there's nothing that could be detrimental to the cows. He pulls out all of the dangerous weeds. Well, we're going to give ourselves about 60 more seconds here. Really settling and really breathing in. So that your back musculature can fully relax. And when you feel right, when you feel ready, pushing into the toe mounds of heels, lifting the belt high enough to slide that prop out from underneath you, slowly releasing the tailbone down. And moving here so that you acclimate, feel that new space you've created in the mid back and the low back. And then the final piece of movement here that we're going to do, movement quote unquote, is use our wall. So positioning ourselves where we can sweep our legs straight up a wall, traditional legs up the wall extension. Knees can be bent. The best thing that we can do is find that neutral alignment that we found right before our compression. So right before that double legs hip compression, really think about stacked and inline femurs, tibia, fibia, all the way through the foot structure to the toes. And then we're just relaxing into the low back. So obviously, if the hamstrings are restrictive enough that you're not feeling the low back relaxation, my advice is going to be bend the knees, right? I feel like that is an obvious thing because I want you to feel this like in the back. I know some of you are just going to suffer through the hamstring pain, but I don't recommend it. And then we just settle here. And so the young man gets all of the potentially dangerous weeds pulled and thrown out of the paddock. And he looks around one last time and he feels like, okay, it's time to let the cows in. He opens this big 12-foot gate that allows the cows to move from one paddock to the other. Then he goes back around to the paddock that the cows are in. He opens the smaller gate there and he starts to shoo them forward, right? Move them forward. Almost immediately, he recognizes that he's made a mistake. He's left the little 4-foot gate open in the paddock he's moving the cows into. And as he's moving them in, he sees this, and out of the corner of his eye, he also sees the rancher coming out of his giant house. And so he's shooing the cows into this paddock, but there's a gate open. A couple of the cows get out. Now, when the cows get out, it's a pretty good hassle. The rancher comes down, he slams the gate shut, and he calls this rancher's hand's son over, and he starts admonishing him, telling him what a silly little boy he is and how he should be taking on this responsibility and how he's not ready for this and how he could have injured the cows and how all of these things that either have gone wrong or could have gone wrong are being lectured into this young 8 or 9-year-old. And he's kind of taken aback, right? He's a little, even in his young age, he's aware. He's like, you didn't get the full picture here, rancher. I've been working all morning since 2:30. And he tries to like interrupt the rancher, and the rancher loses at that point. He raises his voice. He starts just shouting at this young boy about how he's not to do this again. Obviously, this is the exact opposite of what the young boy was hoping for. His entire goal was to prove he was ready to be more helpful and more responsible on the ranch. Tears start streaming down his face, and he runs from the rancher and he runs inside and he runs past his dad in the house and he throws himself on his bed. So we're looking at the potential for the last 50 or so seconds here. So you obviously have the opportunity to stay here for this Shavasana, for any Shavasana, if you ever want to be in this shape. But if you are going to transition out of this shape for Shavasana, this might be the opportune time. You might want to start walking the feet down and repositioning yourself. If you're going to stay here, maybe you want to adjust so that the legs are wider, so it's a little bit less strain, or any other adjustment, right? You can bend the knees, but make a choice that feels right and appropriate. Start to prepare yourself physically for the time you'll spend in Shavasana. And then eventually, let's just make our way into a shape where we can fully appreciate Shavasana, where we can be at ease, where we can find some physical stillness. And just let go.
So the ranch hand gets up, walks into his son's bedroom and sees him crying on his bed and says, what happened? And says, the rancher yelled at me because a couple of the cows got out. And he says, okay, well, were you involved in the cows getting out? And his son says, yes, I left the gate open. He says, okay, well, then did the rancher have a right to yell at you? It sounds like, you made a mistake. Mistakes are okay. And the son is like, yeah, I made a mistake, but he didn't even know that I did all the water, that I did all the feeding. And this was the third thing I'd done since 2:30 a.m. by myself. Start to bring some movement to your fingers and your toes. And the ranch hand looks down at his son and he says, it's true. You did some really incredible things today, and I'm really proud of you. But you have to remember that everything you do creates the totalitarian expression or the total expression of who you are, the good and the bad. The movement drift up into your wrists and your ankles, up into your elbows and your knees, shoulders and hips. Move the back, the spine, your neck, your head. Eventually that movement drifts through the entirety of your body and you transition or use that movement to transition from the shape you are in back into a seat. In the seated space, let your spine get tall, breath get fluid. Eyes closed. And with your next inhale, we'll bring our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you remind yourself that it's everything you do that paints the picture of who you are? And try to make that picture as beautiful as possible. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Love the heck out of you. I'll be back tomorrow night if you want to move, and we'll do this again next Sunday. Have a beautiful week if I don't see you. Love you. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Sunday.